Hey everyone, S-Freeze is back to bring you another sweet deck tech, whether you want to build this commander or not. Though I bet, or you will. That's right, the real baddie from the Abzan precon arc here, Betor Ancestor's Voice. Bots are nice and all, but I like the harmony of paying life and gaining life combined with counters and reanimation, and this guy does so much for a commander. Flavorfully, I like the Dragon Spirit who requires some sacrifice to communicate and bring back the dead to empower the future. Much more interesting than just, wow, we have high toughness. Or you could play the big butts deck, but I got enough junk in the trunk, I want fatties in the yard, exclusively to take them right back out. This time, I'm going to mix it up at the end with some honorable mentions. Cards didn't make my list, but are great options for a budget list or even a non-budget one. It should be noted that my list cares primarily about reanimation, and the life gain adding counters is just an incredibly juicy signing bonus Betor brings to the table. They have me a return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you like toolbox decks with giant handmaker threats, then get ready. This is going to be a grindy Abzan value festival that churns out bombs. We don't pack much card draw because our value comes primarily from raising the dead, and our threats will dominate the board. So, if you aren't hyped yet, let's take a look at this 2025 Commander-only text box so you know it's pushed. Betor Ancestor's Voice is a 5-drop, 2 an Abzan for a flying lifelink 3/5. Solid stats, but lackluster so far. Mayhaps the second ability makes up for it. At the beginning of your end step, put a number of 1/1 counters on up to one target creature equal to the amount of life you gain this turn. Alright, so we already have some life gain payoffs, very solid so far. But there's more. Return up to one target creature with mana value less than or equal to the amount of life you lost this turn from your graveyard to the battlefield. Wowza. If you get to end step with Betor in play, you get a reanimation and tons of counters if your deck is built right. And you Betor believe we built this deck right. Betor having lifelink means each turn thereafter you will at least get 3 counters if it attacks. This is quite the payoff in the command zone, but the deck will require support. So first we're going to have our ramp. Like any deck filled with big fatties, we need some veggies. We're going to be ramping on 2 and not much to that, but we are running the best of the best on 2. Secure Tribe Elder can only get basics, but it's also a chump blocker that we can get back at the end of turn for the mere price of playing a shock, or a plethora of other things, but in the case of shocks, we're running all 3 fetches, which lose an additional life for our count, and 3 visits in Nature's Lore to facilitate that. Farseek is not as good as the first 3 for traditional land ramp, but it can Surveil to filter draws and or fill our yard, or we can get our Triland to fix mana. The take that I hope is not nuclear hot, but a hot take nonetheless, is that the first Surveil land in a deck, if you already have shocks, to me, has more utility than a duel. I would pay 2 life for the option to Surveil exactly 1 time. Gyre Sage can evolve naturally in our deck of giant monsters to add tons of mana, or we can use our commander's end step trigger, like anabolic steroids, to make sure it's turning out green mana the following turn. Malevolent Rumble lets us dig 4 and take a permanent from among the 4 and put it into our hand, and then gives us an Eldrazi Scion to ramp us once on a later turn, or make it a 1 mana dig 4. Everywhere this card shows up, it's doing work. If you're in green and like permanents and or the graveyard, this card should be in your deck. Easily one of the most bang for your buck cards in the game. Lastly, we have Crows and Verge, which is Celestia's upgraded Myriad Landscape. This list is running Ancient Tomb for the ramp and life loss, and it's definitely a 4 with tutoring, creature, toolbox, combo, and reanimate game plan, so you might as well put some game changers in. Finally, Ice Still Explorer is everything every green graveyard deck wants in 2025. Extra lands, you can play lands in the grave, and it mills. If you ask for more, you're actually insane, please leave. Less overpowered is Blossoming Tortoise, that ETBs and attacks to mill and grab lands, but that's less busted on a 3/3 body, which will realistically only do it 2 or 3 times if there is anything resembling a board state. Pumping land creatures doesn't matter as we have none, but it makes cracking our Horizon lands free, which is super neat. Next, we have cards that aren't ramped, but finding land drops is also important to playing spells, it turns out, and these cards have some more than incidental upside. Angel of the Ruins Plane Cycles, and grabbing a shock is more important in this deck where we like additional life loss on our turns, and then it sits in the yard as a juicy reanimation target. Since we get up to 1 per turn, the more options the merrier, and when it enters, it exiles up to 2 target artifacts or enchantments, not to mention it's a flying 5/7. Hermit Druid is busted on any day of the week ending in Y, if you're wanting to make some sacrifices in deck building. Just kidding, we're a Fields of the Dead deck, running only 6 basics, 1 activation, and with an expected value on mill of 15 cards and change, your graveyard should on average be stocked. 2 activations, which also count as card draw by the way, because you're getting a land to your hand, and you will feel like king of the world. I'm a Golgari geek at heart, so we had to bring the heat for this deck, so we're going to have all of our classic graveyard staples. Lumra Belle of the Woods is just that. ETBs to mill 4, and then return every single land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. With the Field of the Dead, this will also bring tons of bodies, and it's also a massive vigilance reach creature with power toughness equals the number of lands you control. Aftermath Analyst is an uncommon that Powercraft World Shaper, ETBs to mill 3, then for 4 mana, its active ability gets back all the lands in your grave, basically the Lumber ability, but paid in installments on a 1/3 body for 2. Life from the Loam lets you get back lands and makes pulling up things like Field a losing battle, not to mention dredging it back lets you fill your graveyard. This card has held its place in green graveyard goodies for nearly 20 years. Run this card in your graveyard decks. You'll be glad you did. Speaking of cards to run in graveyard decks, we have Entomb and its lookalike, Vial Entomber, the best cards to get the exact card you need in your graveyard. Entomber also bringing a nice Death Touch body to hold on the fort, but Entomb being a 1-mana instant is just an insane rate to not run. But the body is very relevant for Entomber. We are a toolbox creature deck, and this is a creature. Overlord of the Bailmart can be cast on 2 or 5, or reanimated. But whatever happens, it will mill 4 cards and bring you back a creature to hand. It's just a great value play, and it fuels the yard on enter and attack. This card is a reason to play back in Modern, and it's as powerful in Commander. Lastly, even our lands help us do graveyard shenanigans. Bolligad Recovery is a regrowth on MDFC, unfortunately entering tap, but it's from the old cycle. It's our only way to get back a non-permanent spell, but that's a small majority of our deck for a reason. Tomb Fortress is a land that taps for black and for 5 mana, and itself it will mill 4 cards and reanimate at sorcery speed. Don't mind if I do. It will exile itself, so you cannot loop this with Life in the Loam, but still, one time should be good enough. We got a lot of bombs in here. Shifting Woodland is a cool card that can become one of our bombs in graveyard. For 4 mana if we have Delirium. It also comes in untapped if you have a forest and taps for green. Lastly, Riftstone Portal is a Yavimaya and then some, but only in the graveyard. It gives our lands the ability to tap for green or white. It's an excellent card to mill as it fixes your mana. And we're running Urborg and Yavimaya as well to make sure we really have all of our colors. Even our fetches will tap for mana. This lets us store the life loss for a crucial turn to reanimate a big target, or to surveil on a later turn. Not to mention it'll help shuffle cards away with our Sylvan Library. This is a super useful upside. You may want to save your fetches in this deck if you have the fixing already in place. 6 can fuel our mill and get back lands when it attacks, and gives our non-land permanents in the graveyard retrace, meaning we can discard one of the lands drawn to play them, turning our milling into card advantage. Conduit of Worlds lets us play lands or cast spells from graveyard, and is a great value piece to keep the gas flowing. Next, we're in Abzan, so our deck building would be remiss without tons of removal. Deadly Rollick is an auto-include in black, and Snuff Out for free in black-green since we can find those forests for ourselves, and in this case, we get the privilege of losing 4 life to cast it for free. We're also running Solitude as a tutorable creature that exiles something. This deck has a lot of sorcery speed actions, even though they're powerful ones, so having free instant speed removal is the best. Why pay 1 mana when you can pay 0? And we have such a wealth of options, we aren't running Swords or Path. Dam only destroys a creature, but it can also be a Wrath if we're someone behind, and we are very, very good at rebuilding. So Scorched Earth doesn't bother us too much. You can blow up your own board if you have to. But the flexibility is key here. This is either a single target removal if you're ahead, or a Wrath if you're behind, which solves the traditional problem of Wraths, where they just rot in your hand if you're ahead. Toxic Deluge is our other Wrath option that can also give us life loss to reanimate something massive if you play our commander after, or use Maliki Rebirth for combined 4 mana to get back Betor and have lost tons of life to reanimate another threat. Bitter Triumph is perfect for reanimator lists since it lets you bin a fatty, but in our case, the alternative cost of 3 life is also a great upside to let us reanimate a fatty. Oh, and did I mention the actual card does things? The card itself kills a creature or planeswalker. Sorry, I got distracted. Turning cost into upside is my kink. Anguish on Making hits any non-land card and exiles it, and loses this 3 life as an upside, and warrants a spot, even as removal, not on a permanent. On permanents, we have Witch Enchanter as an MDFC that can bolt us, which for Betor's purposes is again an upside, and it hits artifacts or enchantments. Not to mention being a creature, we can reanimate this as one of our targets for Betor if we've lost 4 life. Necron Deathmark has a flash 5-drop, 5/3, that ETBs and mills a player 3, most likely us, and destroys a creature, most likely someone else's. Skyfisher Spider is a 4-mana 3/3 reach, and when it ETBs, you can sacrifice any creature to destroy an online permanent. Then, when it dies, you gain 1 life for each creature card in your graveyard to let Betor get something a massive amount of counters at end of turn. Vono Butcher of Magan is a shoo-in for this deck. A 4/4 Vigilance Lifelink for 5 is okay, but not impressive. However, you can pay 7 life and tap it to destroy target non-land permanent, only during your turn, but that's when Betor wants to lose life anyway. It fits everything this deck wants to do. You can also activate the ability at instant speed, and the lifelink will help mitigate the life loss, a recurring theme in this deck. Now for the cards that remove our opponent's graveyards. Really, anything is removable if you try hard enough. Boggart Trawler being a land that bolts us is actually an upside here. I've never been so happy to have a painful mana base in my life. Just kidding, I'm a Death Shadow player in Modern. We live for pain. It also ETBs to nuke opponents' graveyards, which is the relevant reasons in this deck. Scavenging Ooze can exile our opponent's cards engraved one at a time, but grows and gains life for their creatures. Emperor of Bones, another all-star in this deck. At the beginning of combat, you can exile 1 card, which is nice but not fantastic. However, and this is a big however, whenever you put a counter on it, you put a creature exiled this way into play with a finality counter on that. Then you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, which it can fuel with its own adaptability. We also run a Hex Parasite to remove the finality counters and pay any amount of life to reanimate anything in our deck with our commander, which brings us to our next point, life loss. This deck is in the small subset of commanders that like hitting themselves. These cards are extremely important to this version of the deck to facilitate Betor's ability to reanimate creatures on its own, though we'll go over some cards that supplement him in that regard later. We already mentioned the fetches and shocks and horizon lands in our mana base, as well as the bolting MDFCs, but utilizing them is extremely important to maximizing this commander. This list is also running Sylvan Library. When paying 8 life, we'll draw us 2 additional cards, and let Betor reanimate any creature in our deck as our curve tops out at 7. Purples of Undeath is another great 2-drop, milling us 3 each turn. Then for 3 life and 1 generic mana, we can buy one of the mill cards to hand. Dross Harvester may look weird, but hear me out. It's a 4/4 pro-white creature for 3, but you lose 4 life each end step, which you can put before the Betor trigger. Then it gains you 2 life whenever any creatures went to graveyard. This will give you pseudo-immunity to aristocrats stuff, unless they have 3 or more drainers or pingers, and the body is solid at 3. Plus, the 4 life means it's very easy to reanimate most of your deck, any additional life loss. A more undeniably insane card is Doom Whisperer. I can't believe this card was ever printed at its current rate. It's always on my first picks in a generic black deck, and this deck turns it into overdrive, with our commander working perfectly in tandem with paying life to Surveil, getting us the fatty into the yard, and then into play. This card could cost 6 mana and be a 4/4, and it would still be pretty good, but it costs 5 and it has a 6/6 Flampler. I'm not sure what they were thinking, but I'll take it. Call of the Bandit Lord enters tapped and only makes colorless naturally, though our mana base can fix this. However, let's just pay 3 life to give our commander haste, which will hopefully gain us 3 life back, giving us at a minimum 3 counters and the ability to reanimate a 3-drop the turn we play our commander for immediate value. It also works for any of our bombs, and giving haste outside of red is big game. Now for the aforementioned reanimator cards. Our commander gives insane value and will likely be a high-profile target. This means 2 things. 1, winning protection, which we can get in the form of Imp's Mischief or Malky Rebirth, but it also means Plan A might not always happen, which is something more players need to come to grips with. However, Plan B is just Plan A and a half. We have more reanimators because you can't have too much of a good thing. Siege Ship Brute Tender ETBs to mill 3, and for 5, including Golgari, you can sacrifice it to reanimate any creature. Priest of Fell taps, sacrifices itself, and by paying 3 life, see again, upside, reanimate something at sorcery speed. However, it also has Unearth, which gives it haste for 5 mana if it was milled. Notably, these are also both 2-drops for an excursion piece, Lures of the Dream Den. I strongly recommend these 3 cards even for budget builds, as Lures lets you play 1 and 2-drop permanent cards from your graveyard once per turn, and is a lifelinking creature on its own. Kasali Primage and Essence Channeler are 2 more great 2-drops to get with Lures, the first being Artifact Enchantment Hate that can also pump a solo attacker, and the second being a Johnny's Primate that is flying and vigilance, and gives away its counters when it dies. What a world we live in. Squirming Emergence is a 3-drop recursion piece for any permanent with CMC less than the number of permanents in your graveyard, which is another reason we have very few non-permanent spells, only removal and ramp. Finally, our creme de la creme, Actual Factor Reanimate. As a life loss will often mean, for 1 black mana, we get not 1, but 2 fatties from our graveyard. And Phyrexian Delver for the same reason, albeit at 5 mana and gaining a 3/2, but the creature body is once again an upside for our creature-based toolbox deck. Celestine the Living Saint is a flying, lifelinking 3/4 that can chip in the air and offset some of our life loss, but more importantly, at the beginning of your end step, she lets you resurrect the creature with CMC less than or equal to the life you gain this turn, the opposite of Betor, meaning no matter which way your life goes, you're getting something. I mentioned this is a toolbox deck, which means we're going to need something to find said tools. Come with me, and we're going to take a quick detour to Home Depot. Our deck has a lot of high utility 1-drops, so does Magic as a whole, power creep is real, but to find them, we have Ranger Captain of Eos to grab a 1-drop creature. You can also sacrifice it to prevent opponents from casting non-creature spells this turn, and ensure your commander makes it to end step, which is massive. And for only 3 life loss in a turn, you can rebuy Ranger Captain for even more value later. Breakglass Gear Hulk really appreciates the mana fixing of Riftstone Portal, but it's an amazing card if you can cast it or get it into play. 4/4 First Strike Trample, and it tutors for up to 2 artifact, creature, or enchantment cards with CMC 1 or less. Yes, please. This can be Guide of Souls to gain life and pump and fly our threats. It could also be Putrid Imp as a discard outlet for our fatties, but notably any card, including Riftstone Portal if we draw it. Haywire Might for artifact or enchantment hate that gains life when it dies. The previously mentioned Hex Parasite that can deal any amount of damage to ourselves, meaning when it goes to end step, we can reanimate any target in our deck, but it can also take impending counters off of Overloaded Bailmerk, kill opposing planeswalkers, and remove finality counters off of creatures from Emperor Bones. All of this rampant paying of life will enable my pet card and last great 1-drop, Font of Agonies, which for only 2 mana lets you kill something if you've paid 4 life, which this deck will often do every single turn. In the next aisle, we have our creature tutor and discard enabler in 1, Fauna Shaman, also notably a 2-drop for Luris. Fierce Empath is not as good, but it's on ETB, so it gets guaranteed value, but can only get a 6-drop or greater, or land in the case of Disciple of Freyalise. White of the Reliquary grows with the number of creatures in our graveyard, and can sack a creature to tutor a land into play tapped, which should almost always be Field of the Dead, as Field will supply creatures for the remaining tutors. However, you can also get Sajiri Step to protect a creature at instant speed, usually your commander, but maybe the white as well. And we also have Majuka Bog for Graveyard Hate. Or you can grab a Surveil land or a Horizon land to draw a card. It also has Vigilance, so it can attack first and fall off combat turn. We save the best for last in Birthing Pod. 3 mana and 2 life to cast, then 1 mana and 2 life to activate. It will tutor a creature into play with CMC 1 greater than the sacrificed creature, but then because our commander saw 4 life loss, it will often bring the creature back into play. End of turn. We have an extremely diversified suite of creatures at every step of the curve. This card really promotes intentional deck building and commander, and I love it. But it's very important you make sure to familiarize yourself with your own list if you are going to be tutoring for the sake of the table. Remember, your opponents are people too. Kitchen Finks is infinite fodder if you have your commander out. As at end step, you can give it the counters for the life it gained when dying to cancel out persist -1/-1 counters and keep getting 4 drops, or you can grab Violence Humor and from there get Phyrexian Delver. With Birthing Pot out, the world is your oyster, this deck goes off. Kitchen Finks also combos with any drain outlet and a sacrifice outlet, as well as Heliod Suncrown to have infinite life loss for our opponents. But for only a 2-card combo, because this is bracket 4, we also have Heliod plus Walking Ballista, and even better, we have 2 ways to tutor Walking Ballista to hand, since it's an artifact with 0 CMC, which is in fact less than 1. On top of that, we also have Necrotic Ooze to act as a redundant copy if one of our pieces gets milled. Necrotic Ooze honestly deserves its own section, as the card is just so fun. We have 22 activated abilities on creatures. Not all are unique, but there are some spicy combinations. Regenerating counters growth from Monolith Troll, Graveyard Hate and growth and life gain from Scavenging Ooze, tutoring off Fama Shaman. We can sacrifice to get a land from Sakura Tribe-Elder, prevent our opponents from casting non-creatures from Ranger Captain of Eos, or destroy artifacts and enchantments. Bellatrix's Untapping All Lands ability comes to mind, and we can give things lifelink, get the ability to ping things from Walking Ballista. It can be a sack outlet. Possibilities aren't endless, but this creature is very powerful and flexible for 4 mana. Though the flexibility does make sense as it is an ooze, it should be pretty limber. Elegy Acolyte is another great 4-drop to pot into, as it will trigger Void and make you a 2-2. It's also a 4-4 lifelinker that when you deal combat damage to an opponent each turn, you lose a life and draw a card, meaning you can draw up to 3 cards and lose 3 life from this 1 card, and it can also gain you 4 life as well. It really helps with Betor's second ability while also fueling your hand. Kritzel Malamet Exemplar does so much for 3 mana. It's a 3-3 legendary cat warrior with your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. This is crucial because our commander needs to survive till end step, and then on top of that, whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than their base power, deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. A lot of our stuff just instantly has counter synergies, plus our commander gives counters. This card will draw us cards, it will make sure our commander survives. This card is so good in this. The card that definitely likes counters on creatures is Terra Symbiosis. This card is one of the best cards from Edge of Eternities, and that's saying a lot. Whenever a counter is playing a creature you control, you draw that many cards only once each turn. This wants big chunks of counters, or 1 counter on each player's turn, both of which our deck can accomplish. If your commander just attacks and then goes to end step, it'll put 3 counters somewhere, and this will draw you 3 cards. And then every additional turn, you'll get even more value. This card is insane. Now the home stretch, our last bombs. Phantom the Show was a personal favorite of mine from Pre-Modern, a 7/7 of counters with trample and variable lifelink that if it would take damage, loses a counter. Luckily, our commander can refresh his counters when it deals 7 damage with lifelink. It's also insane if you have Terra Symbiosis in play. This contrasts with Vish Called Blood Arbiter, who is also great with Terra Symbiosis, but puts the counters into play at instant speed on itself by sacrificing other creatures, and then can remove them to shrink opposing creatures, hopefully to death. Not to mention, it's a flying, lifelinking beater. Lastly, Bellatrix Witherbloom. It has flying and makes pests each upkeep that gain life when they die, and for 10 life, we can untap our lands. This will let us reanimate a fatty with our commander and up our hand faster. Don't forget, I have a commander video for that guy as well, and that link will be in the description. Check that one out, it's really fun. One of my oldest and favorite commanders. I also love Archon of Cruelty as the pod curve topper after a 7-drop. It ETBs and makes one opponent very sad and us very happy. And if you somehow cast it with your Hall the Bandit Lord with haste, it's going to do a ton of damage to the board. Lastly, our Game Ender. Initially, my list had an Eerie Ultimatum, the sweet art with Betor on it, but it's the Hunter first card for sure, as it not being a permanent itself really matters. Plus, the casting cost would be prohibitive for a more budget mana base. I prefer instead Awakening Room / Funeral Hall. The upside of being playable early to help with our life gain, while also being able to be sandbagged as a full board refill after a board wipe. High cost cards having flexibility and usability early is much more impactful for your deck. Not to mention this fits our theme better of having permanents in the graveyard. And lastly, the drain effect also helps with our combo. So I would never include Eerie Ultimatum over this card in this deck. It's still a strong card, but I think I wanted to highlight this example of deck building where this card is for sure the better card in this deck. If we're going to take the greedy card that has a strong splashy effect, it having the ability to be cast earlier for a different effect is monumental. And I think that people need to kind of tune their decks to do the thing better, not necessarily have more powerful cards. I would even and did include Agadeem's Awakening before I included Emergent Ultimatum because Agadeem's can be played as a land. In this case, the land bolting ourselves is a positive, and realistically, most of our permanents we're getting are going to be creatures, and Agadeem's hitting for the same cost as Ultimatum for creatures is not nearly as powerful, but it's still a great ability to have in a spot that would be a land versus a spot that would be a spell. This lets us get, albeit a much weaker version of the effect, but saving room for our creatures to have the effect for. In our 48 creature deck that wants to do creature things. And as a toolbox deck, I wanted to include more space for the tools. With the most controversial card not included out of the way, let's get into our honorable mentions. Cards I wouldn't think twice about if someone else included, but I personally didn't. Restart Sequence is an amazing 2-mana reanimate if your commander wants to attack and ours does. It also costs 50 cents. Stitch Together is more pricey, but the restriction is easier to satisfy with the self-mill stuff or as the game progresses. Absent Charm is another great budget option, either removal, card draw, and life loss, or counters. Don't use the counters, the commander does a Betor. These first 3 are fine and good budget options. The problem is they're not creatures, they're not permanents, so if you mill them over, they're more or less gone, which you don't really have in your dedicated self-mill deck. Only the most powerful and efficient spells that are not creatures are included, and we already have those. First Marauder is a great Edict creature to loop. 2 life lost on your turn is easy to achieve, and it can lock players out of the game, but I'd rather win my giant fatties than making someone miserable, even if Voltron players do sign up for it. Similarly, Spore Frog can be hyper annoying for combat-based decks, and we can even tutor it as a 1-drop, though it's a little narrow in function. Hopeful Initiate is a solid removal on a tutorable 1-drop, but the rate's not great. 3 mana and shrink our board is a lot, so outside of a budget, I wouldn't run this guy. Castle Lockland is a way to lose life primarily and draw cards second, but it does both, and it's a land. Whip of Variables is a cost to reanimate, but the lifelink it grants can give our team a ton of counters, and it's a reanimate each turn. However, my list has a ton of threats that already have life gain, so it's very superfluous. In another list, it could be an all-star card. Foundation Breaker is a budget enchantment and artifact hate target, since this is a pod deck, though it's just outclassed by Witch Enchanter. That's an MDFC that can bolt you, which in our case is an upside on top of an upside. Evolution Witness is an additional way to regrowth permanence to hand if it gets the counters from Betor's trigger, but I prefer Emperor of Bones, which is cheaper, is Graveyard Hate, and also can reanimate things into play, though you could definitely run both if you wanted to. Wolvenwald Hydra is a great bomb that tutors a land, usually Field of the Dead, and I also really wanted to include Skrell, but couldn't find any space for him. The Phyrexian mana and protection is great to keep our commander around and also lose life. My last and most important recommendation for any reanimate list is that when you're cooking, season to taste. Play the threats you want to see in the world. Reanimator is your chance to play cards that otherwise would not see the light of day and really have them shine. So play the big monsters you love seeing spark fear in the table's eyes. I hope you like this deep dive deck tech for Betor Ancestor's Voice. And those of you that stay with me this far are the real ones. I've got more deck techs on my channel, and the next video is going to be something different that I weirdly wrote after playing Commander at my friend's bachelor party because strippers and coke are overrated. As always, I'm still asking you to drop commanders you want to see in the comments, and you can find more of my stuff at these links. Only one is a Rickroll, but I'll never tell. You'll have to click them all. You can find me at sfreezy on YouTube, always posting Commander deck lists and reviewing the sets, not Spider-Man, but the rest of the sets that are actually Magic related. As always, stay frosty out there and keep on brewing.